Well, welcome to another episode of Christ and Culture. My name is Pastor Jeff Short, and today we're going to be talking about the subject of lying and dishonesty in our public culture today. I have never seen a time in our country, in all my years, where we have people who are willing to tell great big lies right in front of other people and hold to that big lie in the face of evidence. And so we see that happening more and more today, where people will just tell big lies right in the face of apparent contradiction, in the apparent refutation of their story. They're just willing to go ahead and continue on telling these lies, and the secular news media is willing and able to help them, enable them to continue to do this. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the situation, the news recently, the last couple months. We've run into this individual named Jussie Smollett. And what happened was he staged a hoax. He's an actor. He's a professional actor, Hollywood actor. He makes, I think, $100,000 or so plus dollars per episode of the cable news television show Empire. And he's one of the not one of the stars, but one of the contributing actors on that show. And he came up with a plot to either gain publicity or to earn some more money, and that was that he would mail himself a death threat and put white powder in there. And so he did that. A few months back, he mailed himself a death threat with white powder in the envelope. And that got a little attention, but it didn't get very much attention, so he then upped the ante by staging a hoax attack on himself, and he hired two Nigerian brothers to be the perpetrators, and he paid them to fake like they were going to beat him up. The only problem was it wasn't captured on videotape like he thought, and so he then had to file a police report, and so he filed a false police report. Okay, so the story broke, and all of the news networks were reporting on his attack, and this is a terrible racially motivated attack. It was politically motivated attack, and there were all kinds of components of this attack. And so Jussie Smollett was getting a lot of sympathy. He was a victim, a survivor of attack, and so on and so forth, the way the media plays everything up like that. Well, come to find out, as the police began to investigate this more and more, they came to the conclusion that he staged the whole thing. The two brothers that he hired to help him stage this attack, they confessed that it was all a lie, and yet this Jussie Smollett continued to put out that false narrative that he was a victim of a racially motivated attack. And even after he was arrested and charged with 16 counts of false reporting, we just learned recently, a couple days ago, that the prosecutor in Chicago dropped all charges against him, and he's walking free. No consequences of his actions. And the strange thing about it is, after he was released and all the charges were dropped, he came out and again gave that false narrative. He began to say, I would never do anything like this, and I'm going to continue to fight for underprivileged people and marginalized people. And he gave the whole spiel about how he's a crusader for human rights, totally refusing to confess to his lies and his deceptions and his hoax. He's instead saying, no, this is still my story, and I'm sticking with it. And it seems like the news medias, the secular news media, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, they're going along with that. They're going along with the narrative because it fits their political biases. against Trump and against conservative politics, and so they're going to go with that. And it doesn't matter whether it's true or not, it's just the narrative that they want to push forward. Now, one of the things that we have to take note of today is that we live in a public culture that is willing to be deceived as long as the deception fits our ideology. And that's a dangerous spot to be in. I mean, it used to be that if you wanted to put out a false narrative, and politicians would always do this, at least they had to come up with some plausible explanation, or they had to have some kind of narrative that fit together and was somewhat convincing. And that's what politicians have done for a long time. We've known that they spin a lot. The Clintons, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, are famous for spinning political correctness and shading the truth. Bill Clinton, in his deposition, asked, what is the definition of is, and hair splitting and parsing of words and doing what lawyers do, legalese, to try to spin a narrative. We know that happens in politics, but they usually make the narrative somewhat believable so that you could at least go, well, yeah, I guess that could have happened that way. In the case, this most recent case, there is no spinning. There is no giving the people who are listening to this story any room to say, well, I guess that could have happened. No, it's just blatant, bald-faced lying, coming right out in the face of mountains of evidence and saying, I was attacked, like this Jussie Smollett, I was attacked, and I was targeted because of my race. And he puts that out there even though everyone knows it's a lie. And he's an actor, he's paid, he's a professional actor. He's used to memorizing lines. He's used to looking at a script and then making that script come alive. And so here is just another instance of day at work for him. He's looking at a script that he probably wrote, or maybe somebody else wrote it. That's another thing that's strange about this case. How was it that a person who everyone knows is guilty of a crime, how is it that a person that everyone knows is lying? How is it that the police, after hundreds and thousands of hours of investigation and probably millions of dollars spent getting to the bottom of this hoax, and how is it that after he's indicted on 16 counts of false reporting, how is it that he can just up and walk away and all the charges are dropped and the whole record is sealed, so you can't even look at the evidence that the police gathered? How does that happen in the United States? It happens in a corrupt political system. It happens in a corrupt system, and that's what's happening in this instance, Chicago. Somebody powerful, or a couple people who are powerful, 2 or 3 people who are very powerfully politically connected, picked up the telephone and told the prosecutor that she is to let Jussie Smollett go, give him a slap on the wrist, and then send him on his way. Despite the mountains of evidence, despite the police department, despite even now the mayor of Chicago, who are furious at this result, despite all of that, somebody was able to get on the phone and make a call and let this guy walk free without any justice being done in this situation. How can that happen? It happens because the system is corrupt. And in Chicago, it's particularly corrupt. We've known that all along. Chicago has a history of corruption, all the way back to Al Capone in the days of corrupt mobsters and then corrupt politicians who were in the pockets of the mobsters. Well, that whole atmosphere is still there. And you can look at this latest situation and say, yes, this is a continuation of the corruption that we've already known was in Chicago. It just wasn't on the surface. And once in a while, like we just saw in this case, it surfaces and you see the blatant corruption. Here's a man who was trying to stir up racial tension in our country. For political ends, he wanted to stir up a race war. He wanted to stir up race division between black and white. He wanted to agitate for division in our society, and which could have actually started a race war, which could have actually triggered a civil war in our country, which could have been leading to riots, people being killed, buildings being burned, businesses being destroyed, millions and billions of dollars destroyed, and people's lives ruined, fires and riots in the street of major cities. It could have led to that. The situation is that volatile, and this man tried to instigate something like a racial division or race war in our country, and he's being allowed to walk free, and he's being allowed to lie in public, and he's being allowed to, through the secular news media, he's being allowed to perpetuate a false narrative that everybody knows is false, but they're willing to go along. The news media is willing to go along with that narrative because, why? Because it promotes an anti-Trump agenda. And so their ideology is overruling their job, profession of telling the truth, getting to the bottom of things, investigating, finding out what's really happening, and telling the people the truth. They're willing to suspend the truth as long as it furthers the political ends of these journalists and the news organizations. And so we are in a situation right now in society. So we're getting to the point where it's really difficult to know what is actually taking place. When you see pictures and video and audio and reporting right in front of you on the screen, it is very difficult to know what is the truth and what are lies. And so as Christians, we have to be very, very careful that we test all things. We simply can't believe, and we've heard this before, we've heard this for years and decades, you can't believe everything you read. And that's true, but now we need to add on to that adage, and we need to say you can't believe everything you see, you can't believe everything you hear, you can't believe everything you're being told on a news report, because the people who are presenting this can be so biased and so partisan that they can take a falsehood and present it as the truth, like in the case of the Jussie Smollett. Jussie Smollett played the victim perfectly. He made up a fake story. He made up a false hoax. He claimed that he was attacked by two white men in Chicago who were Trump supporters, who were screaming and shouting racial disparagements at him, and who hit him and punched him and put a noose around his neck and tried to bleach him with chemicals. He claimed that he was attacked. He claimed to be a victim. And the newspapers, the secular newspapers, ate that alive. They rolled with that story. They went with that story because it fit their narrative. He was on national television with Robin Roberts on ABC News. She sat down with him and gave him a super sensitive, sympathetic interview, didn't ask really any hard questions, and he was able to lie to millions of people in our country to claim that he was a victim. Well, all of that is false, but being the professional actor that he is, it was good television. And so ABC aired it. Also, in addition to being good television and being emotional, and they knew that a lot of people would tune in, it also promoted the narrative that the president and the current administration is promoting racial division. And so it fit into that political ideological narrative. And so the news people and the news gathering organizations, they wanted to run with that narrative. And so Jussie Smollett was a player in their promoting of the leftist, radical leftist, progressivist agenda. And so he fit right in. It didn't matter whether it was really true or not. It didn't matter if it really happened. It was something that they could use to promote a point of view that they wanted to promote, and they did. Now, when the whole story became ridiculous and fell apart, the news organizations still continued to promote that same narrative. They simply moved to a different tactic. They said, well, you know, this might not have happened, but there's still this kind of racial tension in our country, and there's still this kind of racial bigotry in this country, and so on and so forth. In other words, they used a fake hoax attack to continue to promote a narrative and promote and push a political agenda. Instead of saying this was a hoax, this was a dangerous and very unprecedented hoax in American political history, and it could have been dangerous, it could have led to dangerous results, there could have been riots, there could have been deaths, there could have been killings, there could have been fire bombings, there could have been violence in the streets if this hoax hadn't been found out for what it was, because it pushed a narrative that this country is full of bigots and is racist and homophobic and all the things that the administration is accused of and the Republicans are accused of. And the news media wanted to push that narrative, and they did push that narrative. Now, even after Jussie Smollett, his hoax was exposed, and the Chicago police gathered evidence and put out a warrant for his arrest, and even after they charged him with 16 counts of false reporting to the police, essentially lying to the police and staging a hoax, even after all of that, and even after this prosecutor who had these 16 counts over Jussie Smollett, who let Jussie Smollett walk free, dropped all 16 counts unexplainably, irrationally, for no reason. Even after all that, Jussie Smollett comes out and says, I'm not guilty of any of the things I'm being charged with. I would never do that. And even going so far as to saying, I'm my mother's son, and I would never do anything like that. Appealing to his family and his mother to try to get people to convince that he's actually telling the truth when everyone knows that he's lying through his teeth. Even the lawyers for Jussie Smollett communicated that they know that he's lying through his teeth. The police know he's lying through his teeth. The prosecutors, even the office that let him go, refused to say that he was innocent, and actually said they believe that he's guilty and the evidence is valid against him. Despite all that, they let him go. And the reason they let him go is because we live in a corrupt world today, and it's getting, unfortunately, more corrupt. And we're seeing not just lies being spread in our society through the internet and the news media and television and radio and print. Not only do we have to deal with lies on an unprecedented scale, but now these lies are actually not even hidden. The people who lie don't even try to hide the fact that they're lying. But they keep telling you things despite the obvious lies that they're telling you. And the key to it is that if you are so politically and ideologically driven, you're willing to buy into those lies because you're being politicized in this political culture that we live in. And as Christians, we need to step up and say, no, we're not going to become people who are blind to the lies, and we're not going to buy into the lies. And so what that means is when someone on your political side does something wrong, you're not going to cover for them. For example, if you voted for President Trump, or if you voted for Hillary Clinton in the last presidential election, and let's say you voted for President Trump in the last political election, and he does something wrong, and it's proven that he did something wrong, well, then you're not going to cover for him. You're going to say, let the punishment fit the crime. If he did something wrong, then he needs to be punished. If he didn't do anything wrong, then he doesn't need to be punished. But don't do what the radical leftists are doing with Jussie Smollett. They're basically saying, yes, he did something wrong, but we're not going to punish him. Or they're actually saying, well, maybe he's telling the truth when they know he's not telling the truth. We cannot buy into this, what is called moral relativism in our culture, this secular idea that there are no fixed truths. This is what they're teaching in colleges and universities right now. It's part of this postmodern philosophy that is spreading in the colleges and universities. It started there, and now it's spreading out into the popular culture. It's all over the news, where you can have people telling bald-faced lies and millions of people buying into that lie because it promotes their philosophy or promotes their political cause. As Christians, we need to follow God and follow the Lord Jesus Christ, where Jesus says that he was the way, the truth, and the life. He is the way, the truth, and the life. He's the truth. And a lot of consequences flow from following the truth. As Christians, we cannot follow lies. If Donald Trump, for example, is telling lies, we need to say, okay, this is a lie. Here's why it's a lie. And not follow someone blindly, even into lying. We can't be like the people who are supporting, for example, we just saw the documentary Leaving Neverland, featuring the Michael Jackson documentary about his pedophilia, his sexual abuse of young boys. Now, there are fans of Michael Jackson that like Michael Jackson's music, they like his dancing, they like his entertainment, and so because they like him so much, they refuse to look at the facts, and the facts reveal that Michael Jackson was a child abuser. No question. No possible way around that. And yet they refused to believe it because they like him. And as Christians, we can't do that kind of thing. We need to be able to say, we follow the truth. And if our favorite political guy is lying in one instance, we need to call him out. If he's trying to spin a false narrative, we need to call him out. We can't become this postmodern, secular, situational ethics kind of people. We need to be standing on the truth of the Word of God. One of the reasons why Christianity was such a great and bright light in the early days of the Roman Empire is because the Roman Empire was more like our modern culture today, which was secular and it was relative, and you had politicians lying through their teeth back then, and deception and dirty tricks and all kinds of things that you would see from a fallen human race. And the Christians came in to that culture and said, we have the truth. Jesus really did rise from the dead on the third day. If he didn't rise from the dead on the third day, Christianity is over, done, finished. But because he rose from the dead, and that is the truth, we will stand on the truth, and we will die and go to our graves standing on the truth. And that's what we have to do today. We have to be truthful in our own lives. We have to be truthful in public. We have to be truthful in private. We can't be lying to family members. We can't be lying to friends. We can't be lying to people at work. We have to tell the truth, even if it hurts. There's a scripture in the book of Psalms that talks about the person of integrity who speaks the truth even when it's difficult. And so we have to be willing to speak the truth even if it's hard. We have to be willing to confess our own sins if we did something wrong. We've been dealing with, for example, some of the megachurch pastors who have been involved in scandals recently. And one of the characteristics of these megachurch pastors is that they usually refuse to come out and confess their sins and their faults. And one of the problems with that attitude is that it shows a pride and it shows an unwillingness to humble oneself. And so what needs to happen in the Christian community, and we need to be leading the way, is that we got to be so committed to the truth that we're willing to expose ourselves. We're willing to call ourselves out, so to speak, and say, look, we have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And if you have sinned and fall short of the glory of God in any particular way, you need to confess that quickly to God and to people and make it right. And we need to be leaders in this area. So I would encourage you to stand on truth. Don't be led astray about all the deception that's occurring, and don't you be a perpetrator of deception yourself. So be extra honest, be extra truthful in these lying, deceptive days, and we will shine again like the early church did in a pagan dark culture. Well, I hope that's been a help. We'll see you back next week on another edition of Christ in Culture. God bless.